Whenever we have a technology that can do X, the better response is to pause. Now look at these user needs and opportunities. And given this, is there a space for that technology? If not, what will we need to evolve about the application of that technology in order to meet this need?
We're exploring the intersection of video games, emerging technologies, and product team KPIs with Kristie J.Fisher, PhD, the Senior Director of Global User Research at PlayStation Studios.
The fact that fun is a KPI for games, essentially, is something that I love. I think many times as researchers, we stand in our own way. We don't feel empowered to suggest a new KPI. We're just like, well, that's not my job. That's some MBA's job. It absolutely is your job. You are the expert on the people, the humans, the players, the users that you are building for.
In episode 18, we explore Kristie's experience at PlayStation, Google, and Xbox, and dive into how teams can build more engaging AI product experiences. We discuss similarities, differences, and key learnings of working in games and big tech. How insights teams should be structured to ensure they're delivering impact. How to create immersive experiences by creating KPIs for joy and delight. The benefits of AI to researchers and how AI is transforming games.
Some of the best organizations, whether it's in tech or games, are starting to move towards more of this integrated multidisciplinary insights group. Let's have a head of insights, and under that, let's have user research, analytics, some personalization tech, product strategy. Let's have all of the data and insights people all talking to each other all of the time and collaborating, because it's only when you're really triangulating across those multiple perspectives and multiple types of data that you get the highest confidence.
Kristie J. Fisher, PhD, has spent the last 15 years conducting user experience research and building and leading research teams across a variety of product domains, primarily in gaming. She leads the global PlayStation Studios user research team. The mission of her team is to empower PlayStation Studios to get great faster by being vision-led and data-informed. At Google, she worked on Stadia, Gmail, and ads, and was a co-author of Google's People Plus AI Research Guidebook. Prior to Google, she was at Xbox Research, collaborating with game producers and development teams to improve player experience on Xbox, Xbox Connect, and Windows. A cognitive psychologist by training, her research interests center on gaming, human-computer interaction in the context of AI, and human learning and problem-solving more broadly. Please note that Kristie's views don't represent those of her employer. I'm Brittany Hobbs, and my co-host is RP Figueredo. We interview people at the forefront of GenAI to help you better leverage AI in your teams. If you like this episode, remember to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast in your favorite podcast app. And please find Design of AI on LinkedIn and Substack to join the conversation about GenAI topics.
I am so excited to talk about video games and research and AI. As a kid that grew up in the 80s, I am particularly interested in how you ended up in the field that I dreamed about ending up in. How did your path take you there? I know you went through Google, but now you're at PlayStation.
Also, a kid who grew up in the 80s, didn't even realize for a very long time that video games was actually a career. I actually stumbled into it. I feel very surprised and fortunate still to this day that I somehow ended up here myself. I went to graduate school for psychology, fully intending to be an academic and have my own research lab and study the brain. But while I was there, I ended up doing some contract work at Microsoft Research. And that's really the first time I had any idea that user research was a field within the technology industry. And that got me so excited. And that's when I decided I wanted to kind of pivot my career path away from academia and into industry. And as I was finishing up my PhD and looking for jobs, I saw an opening at Xbox for a games user researcher. And I was like, wait a second, not only is user research a field, you can do this in games. Are you kidding me? I applied and here I am. So the timing just aligned and feel very surprised and fortunate to this day.
Our audience is mainly tech. And what's interesting to me about tech is they keep forgetting that video games exist. They keep forgetting that video games are almost always ahead of the curve. They did the metaverse, they did avatars, they've done AI, they did gamification. There's always something amazing happening in video games. But why do you think tech people view it as a bit of a blind spot?
I asked myself that question a lot. And when I was at Google, I tried to not make that same mistake and point out when there was examples in the gaming sphere that we could draw from for some of our product questions. But I think weirdly enough, games is this interesting middle ground where it is both technology and it is art. And that is what makes it so exciting to me as a researcher, where it's one thing to try to investigate questions around, okay, how can a user accomplish this task as quickly and easily as possible? It's a much more challenging and more nuanced question to ask, how can this user have fun in this world? But because games is kind of a little bit of both, right? It's this creative vision that a game creator has that then needs to be translated into a really complex interactive technology. So because it lives in between these two worlds, I think a lot of times the tech world has just categorized it as entertainment, and the entertainment world has just categorized it as tech, and both sort of miss out on what they can learn from games. So I live in Los Angeles, and one of my constant soapbox gripes is how I never get any respect in this town working in games when everybody else is in film and TV, even though it's a bigger industry in terms of people and money than music and movies combined. That's my short answer is I think because it spans two worlds, it's easy for it to not really truly be a part of either and get forgotten about.
I think history is going to respect you in a lot of ways because when I go watch the Spider-Verse movie or the new Deadpool movie,
Hmm.
they feel like video games. They're just
Hmm.
video games now. It's crazy. Like you have actors basically representing themselves as digital entities. But to your point, video games have to be immersive. And we keep using the expression, user experience design, but digital products don't have to be immersive. They don't have to have a relationship with you. They don't need to be interesting, exciting, tense, emotional things. What you're building is really engaging humans on a level that for anyone who studied arts, it's just amazing. I know Brittany, as a psychologist, you must think this must so exciting too.
Yeah, I think it's really fun on a lot of levels. I think one is, especially in cognitive psychology research, you do use a lot of games and gaming as a way to understand human behavior, and especially human behavior in relation to technological stimuli. I think you already were coming from such a great perspective on that. But two is video games are kind of like the original Gen AI because it is something where you have a stimuli that's incredibly responsive to what you input or how you interact and engage with it. So you really, both between gaming research and your time at Google, you come from such an early stage way of approaching this type of technology, which I think is really interesting. Between your time at Google and the game work that you've been doing, what do you feel has been the thing you've been most proud of?
It's so hard to say. I've had such privilege to work on a lot of incredible products and work with a lot of incredible people. My role right now at PlayStation is really more of a leadership role where I'm having the opportunity to guide an entire team. And we've been really working to evolve the way that we work as the industry evolves and as the technology evolves. And I'm really proud of just watching a generation of researchers grow and feel really privileged to be able to lead them. So in terms of pride, that's it. One of the things I thought was one of the most interesting and challenging things I worked on as a researcher earlier on in my career was on the Xbox Connect, which was a full body motion sensor gaming experience. And that felt really exciting because there was no real template for how to do that. And so it unlocked completely new interaction models, some of which were successful, some of which were very much not successful. And it felt really exciting to be kind of on that cutting edge in that moment of how do you create, we're really good at creating affordances and creating environmental immersive cues to kind of guide a player through an experience in more of a controller input based game. How do we translate some of that to full body input, and what feels fun with one set of inputs might be different than what feels fun when you're doing it with your body. And I felt like I was in a cognitive science sort of research lab asking these really fundamental questions, but I was, still working at a games company. That was a really interesting challenge. I'm proud of the work we did do there.
This does raise something interesting, which is we talk about GenAI as this new material. Many people have referenced it as such. But when we go back historically, you just reference Xbox Connect. And When the Wii came out, that was when we were introduced to accelerometer, and that became a critical part of the iPhone, which was when we started inputting our physical interactions into digital
Yeah.
pieces. And then there's new startups like Archetype now who are trying to
Mhm.
work with sensors and trying to predict what's happening. What does it look like working with this kind of new material? When was the first time that you really encountered that this is something new and I can do something different with it? And I need to ask new types of questions and I have to imagine new ways of working with it.
There's always something new, it's just the degree of how new. But the interesting thing, and I think maybe Jess Holbrook said something similar to you when you interviewed him, is something I've learned is that often, like, there's a cycle where something new comes out. So whether it's the Connect, whether it's VR, whether it's AI, and the first instinct is like, oh my God, this is so new. This changes absolutely everything. We have to throw out everything we knew about design and research and just completely think differently and start from scratch. And there are definitely new and different considerations and ways we have to evolve and adjust, but often the fundamentals stay the same. Thinking about some of this very specific tactical game experiences for the Connect, or even all the way fast forward to now with some of the things we're thinking about with how to use Gen AI, it still comes back to what are the core user needs? And then how will this be a tool that helps them accomplish those key user needs? Whether those needs are accomplishing a specific productivity task or having a deep emotional experience or enjoying a narrative created by a game developer, goes back to what is the user trying to accomplish? This is just a new type of tool. And the same things still apply, right? You need education to the user, onboarding, you need good affordances, you need good feedback. None of that changes with these new technologies. So I've seen enough of these waves of innovations that I now have this almost like mindfulness practice where it's okay, pause, stop panicking. What are the fundamentals? And then just trying to translate those fundamentals back to this new space.
Question on that is how do you report back when you've discovered a human interaction that might infer a new use case or a new capability? Because we talked about the accelerometer or VR, the jobs to be done or the use cases or the value created by the game. Sometimes you only learn about it once you do an ethnographic
And
study of some sort, right? Has any of that ever happened to you? Like, how do you distill that back where it's like, I found something and this might actually change how we view games?
at Xbox and at PlayStation and even at Google, whether it's a game product or a different kind of product, the best product development processes in my experience are really agile and iterative. And ideally, like you're kind of starting out with one set of goals, vision, hypotheses. And then as you do that research, you might discover, like, oh, there's something else here. This technology actually enables something we hadn't planned for yet. And in my mind, that's an opportunity to go back and kind of update that original vision, hypotheses, core jobs to be done. And I welcome that. And I think what I am always advocating for is making sure that at the beginning of any project, we're building in that testing and iteration time so that when we make those amazing discoveries that we couldn't have planned for, that we have the time and the opportunity to now incorporate that new possibility into our design intentions.
That's such an important piece of advice for people. I remember a couple of months ago listening to a keynote for, I think it was for Dovetail, and someone was
Mm.
speaking about how it's like we need to rethink the way that we plan a lot of this testing and be more thoughtful about inflection points and being able to act on new things that we discover that weren't expected. Arpy and I both as practitioners have always worked that way where we build inflection point changes into those research processes. And so it's really validating to hear that you do the same thing. And I think more people would benefit from doing that for sure. So
Plan for the unplanned, plan for the unexpected. Yeah.
absolutely. And to that point, when I was reading some of the work that you've done and the papers you've done, I love the fact that you also look at quantifying magic. And I thought that
Mhm.
was such a wonderful way to inspire the creativity of what you can learn from them. But then looking back at the work that you were doing with Jess Holbrook at Google in your People Plus AI guidebook and the advice and recommendations you were giving to people was 5 years ago. The Xbox project you're working on was 10 plus years ago. And So much of what you were talking about at that point is still applicable today. We're still sort of relearning those same things that you were talking
Mhm.
about so many years ago. Why do you think that that is? Why do you think that these things that have sort of existed for a while still feel novel today as people are doing this research?
It goes back to what I was saying. Anytime there's a new technology that really blows our minds and unlocks new possibilities, the first instinct is throw everything out and we have to totally reinvent how we do our jobs. But the fundamentals, you're a psychologist, you know this, the fundamentals of humans don't change that quickly. Our technology space does. And so a lot of what I've spoken to in my work over the years is the frameworks you can use to approach user-centered design and user research. And a lot of those are based on just like core principles of human psychology, of design. It doesn't change as quickly at the rate of technology or AI specifically, certainly. So I think that's why a lot of it stays relevant is because it's based on core principles that don't change as fast as the rest of the technology around us.
This Design of AI episode is brought to you by PH1, a research and strategy consultancy that helps clients build AI products that customers want. Contact them about product discovery research to answer critical questions about what to build, competitive analysis to find out how to gain an advantage, service and customer analysis to identify the best use cases and value drivers, and workshops and concept testing to validate what will work and to fine tune products. PH1 has worked on products for Spotify, Microsoft, the National Football League, Dell, Mozilla, Bell, and various health and higher education groups. Bring in an expert to make sure your products and teams are focused on what customers want. Visit their website to book an intro call, ph1.ca.
I have a question about how research might evolve because we were talking about how video games, we grew up being super excited about them. And I first discovered that they had game testers who would just look for bugs, right? And
Mhm.
then user testing became another generation of evaluation. And now with GenAI tools, I know there's a whole field of research, both in terms of training, fine tuning, validating outputs, and such. What does that look like in video game worlds?
Yeah. I think, something that we've talked a lot about in the last few years is being realistic about what we can and can't test inside of our labs. So whether that's our playtest labs for video games or whether that's our usability labs and more of like a tech product space, with AI and with just emerging user need experiences, a lot of the key questions we have can only really be assessed in the wild. So, for example, some of the biggest games right now are these like mega online multiplayer, what I would call live service games. So, think of like Fortnite, for example, or Roblox. And when you're building a game that's supposed to be a game like that, there's so many questions about how players will interact in the wild, how the game will fit into their day to day life, how the game will retain them over time, and then the kind of meta experiences that will emerge. Like this idea of emergent gameplay, I think goes back to what you were saying, Brittany, about how games in some ways are sort of the original Gen AI. Like people have found ways to play Minecraft and Fortnite and all of these experiences in ways the designers could not have envisioned. So we have to be realistic that we can't really predict ahead of time or we can't get reasonable insights that can say for certain this is going to be what the user's experience is live. You have to just put it out there in the world and see. So we've been adjusting a lot of what we do to help work with our teams to do those smaller live tests that eventually grow into these more closed betas, open betas, and then allowing the questions that can't be answered in the lab to be answered in a more controlled live environment before we're ready to do a big public launch.
Thinking then about these sort of probabilistic experiences, which, Gen AI is very probabilistic, gameplay is very probabilistic. How are you actually testing for that? You were saying about those closed environments, so people are using the actual game, but in a very controlled time and space. But if let's say I'm a product person, I'm from a product team and I want to understand, well, what should I be doing that I just don't know, especially because this is very new for most people.
Mhm.
So, what are some tangible suggestions that you would have for product teams who do need to be testing probabilistic experiences and don't really know where to start or how to get the best, least biased? insights?
Yeah. Plan ahead for a slow, phased live testing map where maybe the first live test is just among your company. And then maybe the second one is your company and friends and family. And when I say controlled, it's like, okay, you're going to have access to this product for the next 2 weeks. Use it or don't use it. You know, with us, it might be like, hey, we need concurrency of X amount of players in order to do matchmaking. So everyone please play on Saturday at this time. At the beginning, it's quasi in the wild, right? Where you're okay, I'm just letting people use this on their home devices, on their home networks as part of their day-to-day life. But there's some constraints around it because the product's not like fully baked yet. It's still in progress, but it gets you a little bit closer to out of the lab and in the wild. And then the next step is a little bit more close. And you're just kind of getting closer and closer and closer. And you can't ever be absolutely 100% certain whether your product's going to succeed, what your user's experience is going to be until it's fully live. But you can narrow the risk and increase your confidence as you go from in lab testing to partially live to a little bit bigger to really close to the full live experience and then launch. We're looking at it as an ongoing gradual thing.
Absolutely. And in this situation, do you find that you're getting better results if you're doing just like free form, letting them play and them coming back to you with what that was? Or are you giving them tasks and sort of assigning different things that you're trying to QA?
It always depends on what are the key questions and areas of interest for a specific game. By the time we've gotten to being ready to do a live test, we've already nailed some of the core experience in the playtest labs. Usually we're ready to let people just kind of play. That being said, if there is one particular game mode or something like that where we're like, this is the place that we feel like needs the most feedback and attention and data, we might direct people to please play this mode this weekend. So it really just depends on where the product is and what the key answers are. And in terms of that ongoing ramp up, I'm reminded of there's been a lot of reporting on ChatGPT over the last couple of years and how the first thing they did is release a beta version to a lot of reporters, knowing that they would be really incentivized to break it and try to make it do insane things. And I think that's a really great example of limited live testing, right? Where they had a very particular group, they had very particular things they wanted to get out of it, and they let that group really stress test it. And they discovered a lot that ended up being revised when the final public version came out in 2022.
Have you found that there's a particular method of getting that feedback back or tracking that has been the most effective?
We always focus on triangulating between the qual and the quant. We spend a lot of time making sure that the product experience in the case of Google or the game experience in the case of PlayStation is really well instrumented and that we have a dashboard set up ahead of time where we know we can make the comparisons we want to make to understand what people are actually doing in the product. And then we will either with like diary study style kind of ongoing surveys or a mix of surveys and follow up post live session interviews, try to dig into, okay, this is what we saw people do in the game, in the product. Now, why are they doing that? What is driving it? And how satisfied or not satisfied are they with that experience? How are they feeling when they did that experience? The exact method, again, might depend on the product or the game at hand, but it's usually a mix of qual and quant. And the qual is often open ended, sort of mini diary responses, survey questions, and interviews.
I have some questions about that because I think that's super interesting. But we're in this era where basically Gen AI is in this proof of concept stage. People are
Mhm.
messing around with it. There's all these prompts. We don't really know what we're going to get out of it. It's a time of exploration. But I keep telling my clients when I work with them in terms of, oh, how can I integrate Gen AI? I keep telling them it has to be fun, has to be enjoyable, has to feel like there's a bit of magic happening because otherwise you might as well do it the way you're used to, the way you're comfortable
Mhm.
with, where you know what you're going to get. There has to be a bit of joy. Now, this brings me back to games. And when I think of games, you all are experts in the flywheel effect, as they call it in product land. So I was reading an interview years ago. The guy who's behind the Oatmeal comic was talking about how he makes games and he sits with his family members. He sees how they reacts. He makes paper prototypes. It's all about the reaction, the intensity of the reaction, and just how people play and how strongly they play and how aggressively they play. That's how you can really sense the emotional connection of something. On the
Mhm.
other end, I was listening to an interview with Nikita Breer, where he was talking about virality and how he makes like very social apps and how he's built number one download apps. And it was always launch it in very controlled small zones and just see how quickly it explodes. And it's all about the growth rate. That's what matters more than
Mhm.
anything. So I'm wondering if you have any lessons or guidance for people who are researching and testing products so that they're not so obsessed with these really abstract, boring metrics. And instead, they can focus on how can they make these things enjoyable because the joy
Mhm.
matters more than whether it works sometimes.
Yeah, great question. I have a couple different answers to that. One is that my biggest sort of eye roll moment as a researcher who's worked in both games and tech is when somebody comes to me and they're, how can we gamify our product? And, I think their heart is in the right place where I think what they're really trying to ask is what you just said, RB, which is how do I add delight and joy to my product? Or how do I increase engagement with my product? But often what ends up happening is they just sort of layer on these sort of surface level elements of gaming. Hey, we added badges to our expense reporting tool. So now our employees are going to love it, right? It's like you're kind of missing the point where things like badges and upgrades and trophies, they're the final manifestation of experiences that are deeply motivating and that deeply provide that joy and that delight and those emotions. So, in terms of how to think about that, it starts with first principles. It's understanding who are your users or your players, what is going to be their context when they come to your product, what are maybe some unmet needs, and then looking at okay, given what we fundamentally understand about the people we're building this for and the context in which they're going to be using it, what are some ideas that we could have that could offer those intense experiences or that might cause them to want to share this with a friend. And then those are our initial sort of creative hypotheses. And then you can start with research to concept test and iterate from there and see if indeed there's a spark there that you can build from with your users or players.
I was looking for inspiration for an article about how Gen AI is not being leveraged in a smart way. And Kayak has launched this tool to ask it for trip planning ideas, and it's just a prompt box, and it tells you, well, it might not give you good, useful answers, but try it out anyways. It has this long, long description. It doesn't seem fun to me. Now, you worked on Google Flights for a little bit, and I'd love to know how would you test or give guidance on how to make a trip planning tool more useful, but also much more enjoyable because trip planning has to be fun.
Just a quick caveat, I didn't directly work on Google Flights. We did collaborate really closely with that team as we were building the Google Plus AI guidebook because they had a lot of great examples, but I can't take credit for the things about flights that are working. I haven't used that tool on Kayak specifically, but of course, trip planning is something I'm very familiar with and have, given a lot of thought about as both an end user and a designer, researcher, and user experience. So again, in this case, I think the opportunity for Gen AI here is to both reduce pain points and increase delight. And I think you have to think about both of those things because if you just focus on, well, how do we make this more fun? But you're not still solving the core need or removing core barriers and pain points, then that fun is going to be blocked a little bit. So I'd say, first and foremost, let's make sure this tool is actually solving a real problem. So understanding like what is currently challenging about trip planning. Is it comparing multiple options? Is it trying to just balance schedules? Is it not having inspiration? And then what are the components of that I can produce? So if I was working on that, I would maybe start with more some foundational research to really deeply understand what are the opportunities here on both removing pain and adding delight. And in terms of adding delight, again, it would start with some creative hypotheses. Like to me, as a traveler, and again, this would be like my creative hypothesis, is that the most amazing experiences I have is when I just kind of stumble across some experience when I'm traveling that I would not have thought to search for myself. That seems like a perfect opportunity for Gen AI, right? Helping you find the unknown unknowns about the particular places you could visit, or even places you might want to visit, you might not know you want to visit and maybe it's based on what you've enjoyed in the past. A trap that people in the tech world often fall into is they start with, cool, we have a technology that can do X. Let's figure out what's use case. And I think whenever we have a technology that can do X, The better response is to pause, now look at the space of user needs and opportunities. And given this, is there a space for that technology? If not, what will we need to evolve about the application of that technology in order to meet this need? Setting delight or fun or certain emotions as a core need or core design pillar is a really big missed opportunity in the tech space that I'd like to see more of. And I have started seeing it from time to time in little things. Like, for example, once you clear your inbox in both the Microsoft Outlook and in Gmail, there's like a little cute cartoon that's with a sunshine. You're done for the day. Yay. It's just little moments like that. But what would the world look like if every single tech product had fun and delight or certain emotions, relief or excitement or something like that as a key design pillar or product requirement? I would love to see what that could lead to.
As someone who's never had inbox zero, I'd love to just have one that just is like, you made it through the day. It's okay.
Keep going.
But I also think for me, I'm constantly trying to understand as the technology changes, as more uses come out, how can we be smarter about researching and understanding these things? And we always feel like maybe there's some thing in academia that's this brand new method that's going to be so smart and so clever. And so it's always a little bit funny, but also confidence building, I guess, to hear you in this moment saying, if you want to put the fun in it, let's just go back to that evaluative research and understand at the core fundamental principled level what is fun about trip planning. And we still keep needing to remind ourselves, take a step back from the technology, get to the real human value, and then bring it back to the technology, which I love.
Beautifully said.
It feels like one of the problems here is that researchers live in this bubble where they're obeying to the KPIs, but there's no KPI that's about joy or happiness. And one of the things I love about behavioral research, behavioral economics especially, is they find a way to quantify happiness and emotional reactions so they can create these micro tests that ladder up into something really cool. How can we help researchers think outside the box a little bit more and think a little beyond the conversion number?
I think that's one of the things that keeps me in games. I started in games, I went away from games for a few years, and now I'm back. And the fact that fun is a KPI for games essentially is something that I love. I think many times as researchers, we stand in our own way. We don't feel empowered to suggest a new KPI. We're just like, well, that's not my job. That's some MBA's job. It absolutely is your job. You are the expert on the people, the humans, the players, the users that you are building for. And if you think there's a missed opportunity in the things that we're optimizing for and the things that we're measuring, I do think it's our responsibility to propose those things, and you can do it in a way that's still data informed. I think that you say it exactly. I think the reason why we have such missed opportunities to learn from games to just make better products in general is because we don't have enough or don't have the right user-centered KPIs. Talked about one example, I think from YouTube in the AI guidebook or in another talk we gave, as how like for a long time with YouTube, this was many years and iterations of AI ago, but the video recommendations were only based on did somebody click it. And that led to basically a lot of like quote unquote trashy videos where there's some like snake eating a cat and you're like, ah, that's disgusting, but I somehow can't look away from it. Just some fundamental human part of me has to click on this wild looking, insane video. But a lot of those videos were low quality and didn't really add value to the people's lives over time. So even though in the short term, they're cool, we've optimized for clicks, in the long term, they saw usage and satisfaction with YouTube go down. So they had to change what they were optimizing for quality, for likes, for extended watching, for things like that, that were better signals that the user was really finding value out of the content. And I think that's the kind of thinking I think that user research could be thought leaders on. But we often kind of put ourselves in our own box of our job is to test the experience, or our job is to answer this specific question, versus our job is to provide frameworks to the team for how to think about making the best possible products for our users.
Do you have access to a lot of the telemetry that enables you to get those signals very easily?
Yes.
That must be really game changer for you because so often the research is separate to data, and the data is a lagging source that you can't get without approval, so it seems kinda crazy.
Now that I've kind of shifted from individual contributor to leader over the last few years of my career, something I think a lot more about is organizational structures and how that relates to ultimately delivering good products. And some of the best organizations I've seen that are really leading in the user experience space, whether it's in tech or games, are starting to move towards more of this integrated multidisciplinary insights group, where instead of having, analytics kind of live over in one, maybe in engineering or maybe in marketing or maybe in business management or something. And then user research, maybe living in design and some other group living in product management. Let's have a head of insights. And under that, let's have user research, let's have analytics, let's have some personalization tech, let's have product strategy, let's have all of the data and insights people all talking to each other all of the time and collaborating, because it's only when you're really triangulating across those multiple perspectives and multiple types of data that you get the highest confidence answers. I will continue to advocate for that as a good organizational model as all of these functions have matured.
I think one of the challenges that I've faced going into a new organization in the last couple months is just that, is how do we empower more people to take on the role of understanding insight? So that's also great to hear because I think researchers have historically felt like, well, this is what I do. I do
Mhm.
research and they don't really understand data or they don't really understand the design side of it. And how can we get more people doing that work? But I want to ask really specifically around AI and how do you see AI being transformational to the role of researchers in
Hmm.
gaming, tech, or beyond?
I've already seen really strong examples of how AI can really help reduce the turnaround time of going from data to insights. So whether that's helping to summarize data, helping to visualize data more quickly, helping to find themes in a massive set of thousands of open-ended responses. There are so many ways that this is just reducing the time it takes for us to go from finishing a study of some kind and then delivering to teams actionable insights. And I could not be more excited about that because as researchers, what I get excited about and what I see my team always getting excited about is thinking about the really interesting, tricky questions, right? Like designing the right, actually observing people in real time. The unfun part of our jobs is, well, now I have a spreadsheet with 8,000 rows and I have to actually turn this into a beautiful product that I can present to my team in 3 days. And AI is cutting that time for us already. And I'm really excited to see what it can do. The huge caveat to that, of course, is that, as always, fundamental principle, it is a human plus AI collaboration. Even as it gets smarter and more capable, you have to still make sure you're pointing it in the best direction and doing your own sort of human sense making on top of the AI summarization. But that's one key way I'm really seeing a evolution and a change, and it's one I'm really excited about.
Yeah. So you mentioned some examples of allowing researchers to process data a little bit more closely. Are there any other examples that you can share of how AI could be leveraged to research maybe increasingly complex games in particular? So,
Mhm.
like, as the complexity of the storytelling and the probabilities of what people can do in it, how does AI allow for smarter research and testing of that?
That's something I still don't have an answer to. We're still at the very early days of thinking about how can Gen AI change what are the game experiences that we're testing. And I think it's more likely that the Gen AI changes the games first. And then in terms of how we need to then respond to then properly test those games and whether we use Gen AI in that testing, I think is still really to be determined. I wish I had an answer. It's something that I think we will be doing a lot of experimenting with it in the next few years.
We talked about telemetry earlier. You have a perspective that GenAI can help in terms of analyzing telemetry in such a way where it can inform potential optimizations
for your teams? Is that something that it could do?
Yeah, that's something we've again been thinking about and talking about. And there is there is kind of a philosophical discussion with that too. So for example, we talk about fun, and fun can have a different definition for different people. And increasingly games are including a lot of different options so that people can customize the way that they play, either to account for different capabilities and limitations. So, PlayStation, for example, we're really proud of the work we've done with accessibility in gaming, but not just that, but also preferences. So, for example, I like to play a lot of my games on easy. I'm just going to say that. And other people don't find that as fun, and they prefer more of a challenge. And also, as we look at all those different options and settings for every game, we always have a fundamental conversation about, okay, let's make sure that whatever options we give people are not fundamentally undermining the design vision and the core tenets and pillars of the game that we know drive the fun. So, if I was able to make a game that was so easy, there was then nothing for me to do in the game. It was like press button to win. That would really not quite be the design intent either. And that wouldn't be something would be worth $60, $70 for me to pay for. So I think the the ability of AI to kind of maybe dynamically optimize the user's experience and maybe adjust the preferences in real time, that's something that we've talked about even before Gen AI, and not just in games, but in products in general, right? Could we leverage AI to kind of see what the user is doing, maybe where they're struggling, maybe where they're not having a great experience or they're not quite getting to their goal, and then automatically adjust something to then optimize that experience. And I think we have to be very careful with that, because while on paper that sounds really good, without really targeted application, it could either lead to challenges and habituation, it could undermine the core intent of the experience, or it could just be confusing to people like, well, why did that change all of a sudden? Oh, I was really, really close to defeating this boss, and then suddenly I got a magic arrow and the dragon is dead. And now I don't have the satisfaction of getting through that challenge. And so it's something that we always love to have these philosophical discussions in our regular user research meetings, but I think we don't have a clear guidebook yet on what that can really look like, but it's certainly a possibility.
You mentioned earlier about how a video game needs to be valuable enough that someone's going to spend 80, $100 on, AAA title. Now, a big way to do that is obviously side missions, and you could take a 20-hour gameplay and turn into a 100 or 200-hour gameplay. Now, with like a SaaS product or typical tech product, one of the most consistent findings that I've had in projects is how underutilized features and tools are and how few users are aware of what you can do with these platforms. And quite often, I've done research for big name tech companies where people are asking for features that have existed for 3 or 4 years. They have no idea they even exist. So what I'm wondering is, as someone who works in a field where you need to constantly find ways in the gameplay to deliver more value and interest them in longer gameplay, what are some lessons that you could share to a product team that perhaps is a little ignorant to the fact that they keep delivering 3 times as much value if they
Mhm.
enable more side missions in their existing feature set?
Yeah. I was laughing a bit when you were saying like people requesting things that have existed in the product for years, because I worked on the Google Ads team for quite a while. And that is one of the most complex products because it has so many hyper expert users. And despite working on it for years, I didn't even fully understand all of the things that all of our multiple product components could do. I think by the time I left, I still hadn't learned it all. So in games in particular, again, it's going back to fundamentals. And for some users, the core value is the breadth or the amount of hours and experience. For other users, that's secondary, and it's more of like the intensity of the experience or the emotional resonance of the experience and the story. For other users, it's the ability of the kind of using the game as almost a platform for social connection or for personal expression or creation. So I think in terms of trying to assess what is of most value to, like, how can we bring value? How can we make sure we're meeting that full scope of needs, that we're living up to our price point or our value proposition? It's understanding, again, like what are the core drivers for the individuals? And like a lot of users, never see all of the side missions or all of the collectibles or all of the things in a given game, just like they don't ever know how to use all of the features in a product. And so in those cases, I think AI could be a pathway for people to understand what they're missing in those products. So in a SaaS type product, being able to say, how do I use this to do X? And then just having more of like a conversational approach to seeing like what you might be missing in the product that doesn't require you to just hunt around menus and be confused and frustrated for 20 minutes. And in the game space, I think there might be a different paths to making sure that players are getting the most possible value from their games. And again, I think that's really understanding all the different things that are driving the fun for those particular type of audience the game is for.
You mentioned so many things that I want to ask about 50 million questions, but I won't. So we're talking a lot about the ability to leverage Gen AI in different ways, in very probabilistic ways. And as someone who puts a lot of thought and effort into how do we test and research and understand the right ways to utilize things like probabilistic storytelling and generative AI, what are some parameters or conditions, let's say, that are important to you as someone working in a space that is creating very immersive stories and has people who play very often and could potentially have addictive qualities to it? What are things that are important for you to consider as you're going into this work and approaching it?
Yeah. The most important thing to consider is always your target players. If you're making a game for children, what is the standard for success and how to use different kinds of technologies is always going to be different than if you're making a game for adults. And in any scenario, really understanding how is the AI or any other new technology going to make this game more fun, more rewarding, more time well spent is a metric we talk about a lot, where it's not just about time, it's about, is that time valuable? Is that time enriching your life? Is that time increasing your delight in your day-to-day experience? So again, it's always taking it back to understanding the person that you are building the experience for and the vision of what experience you want them to have and what needs you want to meet.
I think my big takeaway from our conversation today has been really that you're looking at their whole self. You're really looking at, the joy, the impact that it's had outside of the game as a result of the game. And I just keep looking at tech teams and wondering why they don't do this. And I know we've asked this already, but I'd love to know how we can instill more of it, or if it's an organizational challenge, if it's a leadership challenge, if it's that the principals are not well aligned in these product teams. Like what do you see?
It always comes down to incentives. And as you said earlier, when the KPIs are all just about like, did we move this bar on profit and not like, did we move this bar on profit while also delivering an amazing experience that really provides long term value versus short term revenue? I'm really looking forward to the fact that more and more we have user experience professionals in more of like VP or C-suite level positions who can maybe have more influence on setting those incentives and setting those success metrics. And I really am excited to see where that goes.
Thank you so much, Kristie. I really
My
appreciate your
pleasure.
time. Yeah, super fascinating. It's been so wonderful. And hopefully it does go viral and we can start having some new conversations about, I love your KPI, more time well spent. And if we can get
Mhm.
that culturally in more organizations, what a treat that would be.
For all of us and all the things we have to use every day to just get our jobs done. Plan for the unplanned, plan for the unexpected. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kristie. I really
My
appreciate your
pleasure.
time. Yeah, super fascinating. It's been so wonderful. And hopefully it does go viral and we can start having some new conversations about, I love your KPI, more time well spent. And if we can get
Mhm.
that culturally in more organizations, what a treat that would be.
For all of us and all the things we have to use every day to just get our jobs done. Plan for the unplanned, plan for the unexpected. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. The show is hosted by Brittany Hobbs and Arpi Drake Figueredo. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple to get our latest episodes. We speak to leaders at the forefront of AI to learn how great AI products are designed and how they're transforming industries. To contact us, visit our website, designof.ai.